While there are great maps in the 20-year history of the Battlefield franchise, there are also others that are dramatically imbalanced, poorly laid out, or simply disasters of design. This is the story of the worst maps of Battlefield. Where do I even begin? Part of me thinks that this map is self-explanatory. The other half believes that every Battlefield 1 player already knows what I'm going to say. This is Battlefield 1's Galicia. I promise I won't yell. Of all the elements that one would expect a good Battlefield map to contain, things like lighting quality, good objectives, terrain deviation, responsible sightlines, cover, Galicia says no to all of it. The map is of moderate scale, though the emptiness makes it feel larger than it is. 5 objectives in a chevron pattern define the layout, which itself is not any major problem. The terrain, however, is. Clear as day, it is the flattest level in Battlefield 1, as even River Somme had a lengthy trench network and some rolling hills. Galicia's elevation changes are glaringly minimal, with the most basic of hills able to provide sightlines across the entire map, making it exceptionally frustrating to move or fight anywhere. The most protection one can find is a rare trench which isn't actually deep enough to hide the entire player model. There is also the occasional crater or small shallow river which runs in a horseshoe around the map. However, the shallow banks of which don't help much, and the sightlines within can be just as brutal. The environment is as bland as ever, the vacant brown fields devoid of texture or flora with extreme exception. The light dusting of snow really doesn't add much to the map detail, though it does offer a minor contrast to the field of mud. Small, thin pines dot the map, but these do not hide player movement, provide cover, nor exist in any large or dense quantity to isolate any part of the level. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that their scarcity only exacerbates player frustrations by being a constant reminder of the sheer emptiness and lack of detail. Cover, one of the most critical of level design criteria, is lacking substantially. If terrain deviation isn't present, cover must be there in its place in at least some capacity. It's not. Whatever objects or structures do exist largely surround the objectives, though in that there is a huge asterisk. Nearly all terrain outside of the objectives is barren. A player-sized rock here and there, maybe a fence or a stack of wood. The greatest cover density to be found is the occasional set of farmhouses, themselves highly destructible. In contrast, the largest structures on the map are the set of 5 windmills in the field between the River Horseshoe, where cover is by far the most sparse. Moving across the vast field is a death trap. Vehicles, snipers, prone LMGs, literally anything tends to mow players down. These windmills almost amount to more frustration than positive feature, as players within can more accurately achieve sweet spot distance to enemies approaching. As they offer some of the best initial protection on the map, they typically hide snipers, but this isn't exclusive. More importantly, all of them can be blown to smithereens, making this void even more exposed. This would be a problem in any Battlefield game, however it is particularly egregious in Battlefield 1 due to the insistence on long-range rifles and the potency of the recon kit, which is almost required here. Spotting flares make the few hiding spots worthless, but the game's sweet spot mechanic and damage models make it insufferable. Even if you don't die from a body shot, there is no damage drop-off at extreme ranges. High-velocity rounds, in addition to these factors, make them easy to use and super effective, and greatly enhanced by the map terrain. Galicia also has a lighting problem. When not subjected to its alternative weather effects of heavy fog, snow, or cloud cover, the sun glare is intense. This is notable, particularly because of the lack of objects to block it out, as well as its positioning on the Austro-Hungarian side of the map, resulting in any infantry push from the C objective west being at a major disadvantage. Additionally, the essential nature of the riverbed in hiding players from the majority of open sightlines often results in the sun's reflection in the water, an experience just as frustrating and compromising. Regarding the other weather effects of snow and fog, while these do essentially nullify sightlines and sniper ranges, the lack of cover and safe movement options make it irrelevant. Enemies can appear from any direction, and predictability is always at a minimum. Moreover, players should not have to hope for a random chance weather effect to make the sightlines on a map more tolerable, especially when they are this bad to start. As stated, Galicia features 5 objectives in a chevron pattern, with the empty field at its zenith between the A and E points. The map boundaries are massive, likely intended for light vehicles to flank even if they remain in clear sightlines. Going left to right, the E objective begins as the gimme flag for the Austro-Hungarian team. This is the Forest Battery, and right away, this is where you can tell things are going to be rough. Unfinished fortifications, stacks of timber, and a few artillery guns sit along the forest edge. The capture zone is fairly small and, given the surroundings, very little cover is available. Austro-Hungarian reinforcements spawn in their deployment to the west with sightlines to the flag, though this is reciprocal. To the north, a collection of farmsteads sit clustered together, forming a bit of protection. Is the next flag in this area? No. You have to find it due east near the burning windmill. Near being the key word. D is the western firing line, located within a lengthy stretch of the most developed trench line on the map. What's nearby? Nothing. This forces players to utilize the trench in order to avoid being shot from above, though it forces them into a close quarters zone and what amounts to a kill box of a capture radius within. The river which flows between these two objectives leads north, and following it will lead you to a slight hop in the terrain with a derailed train on the opposite side. This is the C objective, the train wreck. The capture radius is the largest of the 5, and the surrounding cover and map detail most prominent. A few farmsteads sit nearby, offering protection for players and sightline blocks for players respawning on the flag. The overturned train cars are both enterable and destructible, offering minor protection. Southeast of the train wreck, one needs to follow the river to reach the next objective. Literally. The B point, Varahia River, sits within the riverbed in one of the most empty, bland objectives in the entire series. A few small rocks and a stack of timber make up the only cover aside from the lower terrain within the capture radius. A small crater nearby might be your only friend in times of peril. That being said, anyone in the objective zone is extremely exposed and liable to be killed from multiple angles. Spawn points are predictably terrible, placing players on each side of the river according to the respective faction, almost every one being open and exposed. Similar to the opposite end of the map, 2 small farmsteads sit to the east of the river, but this is not where the final objective lies. These buildings remain almost pointless, save for protecting the occasional sniper. The final flag, A, sits further southeast toward the Russian border. When you think things couldn't be worse than the river, you hit the stockpile. This objective is what could be the beginnings of a new fortification layout. Could be. What I see is a few hastily placed carts and boxes which will get destroyed anyway, leaving nothing but the small rocky indents to provide some place to duck and hide. Naturally, with such empty objectives, spawn points around them are a nightmare. This is most evident for the A and B flags, where almost no cover exists. Heck, B frequently ends up placing players in the kill box in the riverbed. For the C flag, spawns are the safest given the nearby buildings and train wreckage, but this isn't much to go on, and they are still very easy to camp. Galicia's objective design is downright atrocious and unacceptable for a modern Battlefield title. Half of these are either empty pits in the ground or a flagpole in the mud with nothing around it. They lack any meaningful layout, protection, or theme. There were better objectives in Battlefield 1942 maps 15 years prior. Aside from the windmills, which we've already covered, the few buildings present on Galicia are 2 types of wood cabin. One of these is highly destructible, leaving nothing but the fireplace and the central stone foundation. The other is a rectangular structure which can be completely eliminated. These buildings dot the landscape between the B and C points, and around the C point itself. Given the protection they offer, they are critical for player movement and are subject to complete destruction early in a round, leaving the terrain just as empty as the rest of the map. Each team deployment is vacant. Austro-Hungarians on the west start at the edge of a forest, though sightlines are clear as day. The Russians have the exact same problem on the east, with even less cover or obstruction. The map boundaries are almost crazy considering how close enemy players can approach both the main spawns. In the event of a full capture, breaking out of either is almost hopeless. The long sightlines, spawn camping potential, inability to sneak or flank, and the objective layout tends to lead the battle on a linear front, encouraging players to grind along the border. The only salvation is a miracle play by someone in a car or horse that manages to escape, stay alive as they pass through the fields, and then manage to survive new enemy encounters at the back flags. Vehicles on Galicia are not the worst, but there are problems. Ground selections are 3 horse assets and 3 pieces of armor. These are restricted to artillery, mortar, and anti-aircraft trucks, as well as armored cars. Not that these are heavily armored, but with limited cover and long sightlines they can prove annoying, especially with shells that have low drop. It would have almost been better for the map to include a single heavy tank or two, simply because of the heavy shell drop limiting their effective range. 2 aircraft are also available. These consist of every type of aircraft: fighters, attack planes, bombers, and for some insane reason, heavy bombers. Like a few other maps of Battlefield 1 where it also makes no sense, the Ilya Muromets are present, and again, without cover, they are absurdly effective. Yes, AA turrets are present on the field, but the flight ceiling of Galicia is abnormally high, allowing it to skybox at the maximum reach of flak range if handled properly. While still counterable, they are so high that there is certainly an out-of-sight, out-of-mind psychology at play. When flying low, yes, they can be taken out with ease, but often not before a single pass wipes out half a team. Just in principle, it shouldn't be available. The good old armored train makes an appearance as well as a comeback mechanic for the losing team. A linear rail line stretches across the north of the map east to west, intersecting with the capture radius of the C flag. Does the train make any major difference here? Sometimes. Chiefly, it just makes a mess of things, and without cover or terrain deviation, it is effective at wiping out enemies near and far, even with the mounted machine gun positions. This is to its disadvantage as well, as it is exposed to AT rocket gunfire from pretty much any angle. Galicia as a map is not some complete and total disaster. That would require it to have attempted something. Galicia is a failure by absence. Absence of cover, absence of terrain deviation, absence of aesthetics, of object permanence, of good objectives, or spawn points, or lighting, or theme, or overall satisfaction. It is essentially a blank canvas, and that might be the most disappointing thing. Perhaps it was drastically unfinished, but that doesn't mean it needed to give me flashbacks of the worst Battlefield 1942 levels. In a game where long sightlines are incredibly punishing and snipers dominate, it's inexcusable. It is a staggeringly bad design and a painful experience for most players. All of these factors culminate to make Galicia, by my criteria anyway, the lowest rated map of Battlefield 1 and a nightmare which needs to be swept under the rug.